The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey everyone, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yeh.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here today with an author chat with Clare Osongco about her debut novel, Midnights with You. And this is our 300th episode.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Rira, we made it to
I lose track.
300.
Wow, that's insane.
So yeah, there's nothing, we don't have anything formal planned to celebrate the 300th episode, but I just wanted to point it out just to, mark this milestone, because who would have thought we'd have made it to this much?
Oh, definitely not me.
But yeah, as always, our podcast and book club is supported by listeners like you. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of the book club, you can head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where as a Patreon supporter, you can gain access to our members only Discord server, as well as monthly bonus podcasts. So definitely appreciate everyone's support us so far and hope to see more of you there. But yeah, we had a really great chat with Clare about her debut novel, which is a coming-of-age story about a girl who takes midnight driving lessons with the new boy next door.
And she's also dealing with her strict single Filipino mother. And we had a really good chat with Clare about generational trauma, which is a recurring topic in Asian American literature. But I really like the way she wrote it in this book. She wrote about emotional abuse in a cultural context. We talked about mixed race representation in literature, soundtrack for midnight driving.
Yeah.
And therapy and why it's so hard for older Asian Americans to partake in it.
And a little bit about Asian car culture as well. So
that's true.
A little something for everybody. So yeah, please enjoy our conversation with Clare Osongco.
We are here with Clare Osongco to talk about her debut novel, Midnights with You. Welcome to the show, Clare.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I just want to start our conversation with an icebreaker. So what is your favorite time of day?
Oh, okay. I really love this. This answer is so obnoxious, I realize, but I love 4 a.m. And that sounds like toxic productivity or something, but this is just genuinely the time I write the best. I came back to writing after a really long hiatus during COVID lockdown, and I started writing this novel actually. I would kind of just be wide awake at 4 a.m. because I wasn't going out. I was isolating, not seeing anyone. And this is just the time my brain wants to be awake for some reason. But I love writing very early in the morning when everyone else is asleep and no one is expecting anything of you. And it's just very peaceful.
That's not obnoxious at all.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the opposite. My best, I remember when I was in college and when I was in grad school, I did all of my writing at 1 a.m. Again, still same as you, everyone's asleep.
Yeah.
But I do my best writing before I go to sleep for some reason. My brain's just so tired that I don't have anything to block things,
I think there's something to that. Your inner critic is too sleepy. So you can write better.
Yeah. For me, 4 a.m. is my bedtime. I legit, I am a vampire. I stay up all the way until 4 a.m. and then I wake up at 9 or 10. It's not a lifestyle that I like recommend to people, but I've always been a night owl. And like you said, like it's easier to kind of shut your inner critic when no one is awake. So I definitely relate to that. And I do love how your characters are, night owls, and they are doing these adventures when everyone is asleep, the authorities and their parents are asleep. So makes sense that your characters are just like you.
Yeah, it definitely seeped in there, the 4 a.m. vibes.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned that you came back to writing after stepping away for a little bit. And, we always love to learn more about our authors in these chats, especially how they got into writing and how, they became a published novelist. So can you share a little bit about your own personal journey to publishing your debut novel?
Yeah, so I've actually wanted to write a novel since I was really young, since as early as I can remember, pretty much. And it kind of started when... So my dad passed away when I was 4 years old, and my mom was talking about him and mentioned kind of offhand that he had always wanted to write a novel and get published, but he just never managed to. And I have this vivid memory of being like, I'm going to write a novel. And that could have easily just been a passing whim of a 4-year-old. But for some reason, I really that idea really stuck with me. And from kindergarten, I was just writing stories all the time, fantastical, weird little stories. And in elementary school, I tried writing a novel. My first attempt was a portal fantasy, and I'm sure it was terrible. And I don't think I actually finished it. And then in middle school, I wrote some really cringy attempts at romance before I had any real life experience of romance. My memory is kind of foggy from elementary and middle school, but I must have finished something one of these projects because I do remember trying to query. And I'm old enough. Yeah. I'm old enough that I did that by USPS, physical mail. And I got rejected, of course. And these books are lost to the sands of time and some ancient computer. But I was so into the idea of being a novelist that I think my mom was initially kind of oh, this is cute. This is a fun quirk. But then in high school at some point, she was kind of oh, this is kind of a problem. You need a real job. This is a distraction. And I see where she's coming from. Many immigrant parents, my mom's from the Philippines. I'm second generation. She came here. Yeah, many immigrant parents, she's you need financial stability, you need healthcare, totally valid concerns. But I feel in retrospect, I feel she kind of, laid it on a bit thick though. I personally, what I would tell young people now and what I've been telling young people when I do school visits is I think it's really valid to do creative things on the side. You can have a day job, you can have healthcare. But being creative, I think, really adds to your life, even if you don't make money from it. But I think I got so discouraged and kind of in my head about how impossible it seemed to get published that after college, so I went to college to study something unrelated, and I kind of just stopped writing for a while. I think I got kind of embarrassed about it. I think some combination of things my mom said and things I internalized from the outside world made me feel somehow this is cringy that I think I can be a writer. So I just had this I don't know, shame and embarrassment around it. And I remember in the years after college, sometimes I would try to write and I would feel so stressed out because of this embarrassment. I'd just overheat. I'm wouldn't be able to write. But then for some reason, so 2020 comes around, the pandemic starts, the world shuts down, and I had this moment where I was wow, one day I'm going to die, so I guess I should do this thing I've always wanted to do. And that's when I started waking up at 4 a.m. And also I think the rest of the world feeling kind of far away because I was lucky enough to be working from home. I wasn't really seeing many people. all of the things that went into feeling so embarrassed kind of didn't seem like they mattered that much anymore, I guess. And like the idea of publishing a book itself felt very abstract and far away. So I was like, I just really want to write like for fun and to like comfort myself. So yeah, that's how I broke out of my writer's block.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's cool, but also a little sad that like your story isn't exactly unique in like people from our community. Like a lot of us grew up. I think it's cool that you were able to keep that passion alive, and now you have a published book. And has your mom said anything about like your passion now that you've shown that you can put out a book that's published?
Like we would like fight about it. Like when I was in high school, we would have like really intense fights about my desire to write. And so I think for a long time, I was scared to talk to her about it. Like I actually waited until a year after I got a book deal to break it to her that I was doing this. And I like sat her down at a coffee shop and she had like a piece of cake. And I was like, Mom, I need to tell you something. I sold a novel. But I think we've come a long way since then. Like she's really supportive now. Like she read it. Like she says she's proud of me. She read it. I was terrified of her reading it. But yeah, it's been good. Like we had a real growth arc around this topic.
That's interesting because mothers and what they do to their daughters is a big theme in your book. Like how did she take all that? Like was she
So okay, I think it's so delicate to talk about this. Like I think a lot of people are confused about the difference between like fiction and like memoir. Certainly people in my life have been like, who's going to play you in the movie? And I'm like, I'm not in it. But okay, I actually like wrote something that I posted to Instagram that really like captures my thoughts about like how autobiographical this book is. I'd love to read it if that's okay, just because like I really got my thoughts together for this. So the book's dedication is for the diaspora kids, for the daughters. And on Mother's Day this year, I posted a little note about that dedication. So I wrote, on one level, my debut novel, Midnights with You, is for anyone who wants to read a love story that's equal parts romantic and sad, or who enjoys slow burn vibes, late night drives, and an arc of healing. But at the heart of it, I wrote Midnights with You for the people who have a lot of tangled, complicated feelings around Mother's Day. Of course, the groups in this dedication contain multitudes. And I want to be clear, every immigrant mother-daughter dynamic is different. Every Asian mom, every Filipino mom is a unique individual. There is no single representative story. But I wrote this out of the conviction that I'm also probably not the only one who's found themselves in a particularly tricky liminal space. I wrote it for the diaspora kids like me who have felt caught between a society that others them and a family dynamic that hurts them. For the ones who feel torn between wanting to be true and loyal to their very family-oriented culture, but whose family relationships cause them a lot of pain. I wrote it for the children of immigrants with unanswered questions about the ghostly ways the past shows up in the present, and how the people in their lives got to be the way that they are. I wrote this for anyone who feels like their mother's sacrifice and suffering means their own pain doesn't matter, but babe, it does. And because it's the struggle I know, I wrote this one for the daughters. I wrote this book about fictional people and fictional situations who are untangling knots of pain similar to my own, in the hope that it might help someone else untangle theirs too. I hope the people who might get some relief out of reading the story will find it. So the part about like fictional people having some of my real pain is really the core of it. But I think like the mom character in the book, like some of my experiences of being a daughter and being a second generation immigrant, some of my own experiences of having a mom definitely like informed the story. But the mom character is like, her personality is different than my mom. She's got different stuff going on in her life than my mom. And I also like, I truly feel like there's a lot of like me in the mom character. Like to write the mom character, I tried to think, what would I be like if I had never gone to therapy and I had way more layered trauma than I do? So like, to my mom's credit, she really like, I kind of explained all this to her. I was like, some of my real pain is in here. It's not about you. Also, you might worry that people will think it's about you. So you don't like, I'm not going to tell our family if you don't. Like, that's also what I said. But, Yeah, I mean, I did not write this book to, talk shit about my mom.
Yeah.
And she's
I am
really
glad that
taken
she's
it in
like
good faith.
not like when she read the book, she's like, "Is this play about me?" Like,
Yeah,
I'm
she
so
did.
glad.
No, she like fully read it. She wrote me this long email about what she thought about it, and I was so scared to read it. But she really read it like, yeah, this is fiction, and it doesn't have to do with me. So I was so grateful for
It's
that.
a really healthy mindset.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, your novel explores, one of the themes is that, there's always context to the reasons like our parents are the way they are. Like they have their own experience, they have their own lives that affect them. But that doesn't exonerate them from the harm of passing those traumas down to their children. Like, why was it important for you to explore this, like this dynamic of like generational trauma?
So I think also in 2020, like I think being isolated and, the world being on fire, like it brought up a lot of like emotional stuff for me, but not even stuff related to that situation, like stuff from the past, because it's like you're slowing down. You have a lot of time to think suddenly. And something that I was thinking about for myself was like how childhood stuff was coming up for me in a way where I was repeating like dysfunctional ways of loving people in my own life. And I was listening to this podcast called the Filipino Momcast. It was like an episode about colonial mentality. So that's like the internalized racism and other like dysfunctional attitudes that come with like the Philippines having been colonized for 300 years. Yeah. And they use this phrase, what you don't transform, you transmit. And that just like really resonated with me. I think that's kind of like, that phrase is like what this book is about, basically. Like about the ways that if you don't take care of your own pain and process it and transform it, it'll like come out sideways in all your other relationships.
Yeah, like that is like a very resonating statement. And like one of the characters in your book does say like, oh, like how trauma happened to us, like that's not your fault, but taking care of it, that's your responsibility to make sure that you're not repeating the cycle. And I thought that was like so true. And when I read the trigger warnings for your book at the very beginning, I was just like, oof, like I'm opening Pandora's box. I am one of those people that you wrote the Instagram post for. So I was like, I have a very complicated relationship with my mother. I need to mentally prepare for this book. But I was like very surprised at how healing it was for me.
I'm so
and like
glad.
My partner was actually quite worried when he read the trigger warnings too. He's like, are you gonna be okay? Like, I don't want you to have like triggering episodes, but now that I'm older, I feel like I have a different perspective. Like if I read this book when I was 17, going through the things I was going through when I was 17, I don't know how I would have reacted. So like I do want to ask, like, what do you hope your younger readers will take away from like Dee Dee's journey with her mother's like Dee Dee's journey with her relationship with her mother?
Yeah, okay. So I really wrote this like hoping that the people who will read it would be teens, because I when I was a teenager, I felt like I had this feeling like no one on earth can possibly understand me. Like I felt so deeply incoherent because, so number one, I was like growing up in a mostly white place as an Asian American. I was the kind of Asian American people found confusing. Like Filipino Americans, I think were like the like awareness raising about us is like lower or something. Like throughout my life, people are just like, what's that? I'm mixed, so that's also confusing to people. And what was confusing to me was all the narratives I had internalized about my culture is that like family is super important, family's everything. But I had such a hard time with my family, with my mom. I grew up in a single parent household, so my family was just me and my mom for a long time. And I just remember, like, I had this feeling as an adult, like, if I had been able to see my experience, like, named somewhere, I felt like that would have given me some relief. You know, maybe I would have felt like I do make sense. So that's kind of like the place I wrote it out of. I had a really amazing chance to meet teen readers the week my book came out, actually. I went to a high school in Queens and met with, like, I think it was their AP English class. They seemed to be juniors and seniors. But one girl was talking about how the mother-daughter stuff really hit home for her. And she seemed, like, relieved, like, when she was talking about it. So I was like, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to cry, but I shouldn't cry because I'm the adult. But she got so, like, passionate about what she was saying. Like, she started to cry, like a tear rolled down her face. But she was also kind of like thanking me for writing it. Like, I think she did feel that relief of like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Like, someone like put a finger on it. So that's like, that's what I was hoping, matters. I guess.
Yeah.
And I worry that like I'm going to scare people away with those trigger warnings. Like, I felt an obligation to put them in because I want people to be able to take care of themselves reading. But I did also try in the writing of it to really like take care of the reader and balance levity and softness with the harsher parts. Like, that's part of why I wanted to write it as a romance. I wanted it to be that like the two main characters, these traumatic things are part of their backstory, but the main story is like them getting to fall in love and like sneak around and go on an adventure together and have good things happen to them and like heal from that point.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I think, this is an Asian American coming of age story revolving around mother or daughters. Like, I feel like the trigger warnings are inherent in the genre, kind of. But it was good to see, like, the bread and butter of a lot of high school coming of age stories is, as an adult now, I guess, like as like a 40-year-old, is kind of seeing kids be cringe because they're young and they don't have, like, they can't help it, right? And your novel also kind of trades in cringe, but more like emotional cringe. Like Dee Dee, your main character, does a lot of self-sabotage and like, as a result of her years of like, emotional abuse. And it definitely hurts. Like, I definitely like cringe to be in her mind space as she's going through like making all these like suboptimal decisions. Can you talk to us about how, like, as an author, how you find that balance between being in this like frustrating space of like a teenager and like the fluffier teen romance like shenanigans that you also have?
Yeah. I mean, I like writing messy people because I think one of the most gratifying things about reading is seeing people grow. And I mean, I've been a messy person for much of my life. I mean, I've gone to like a lot of therapy. I think I'm in a good place now, but, yeah, I don't know. I've made a ton of bad decisions as a youth and whatnot. And I think I wanted to write these characters behaving in a way I thought was like realistic for the kinds of emotional abuse they might have experienced, especially Dee Dee. But I also wanted to write it as a romance. One thing I really like about writing romance is that the two main characters, like the main character and the love interest, are supposed to be foils for each other. So I feel like it's a good way to untangle an idea that maybe like I don't even know exactly what I think about it. And for me, that idea was, what do we owe our families versus ourselves? And Dee Dee and Jay are both coming at kind of like are both kind of on opposite ends of this idea at the start of the book. Jay, her love interest, who's also like a biracial Asian American, his mom's from Vietnam, his dad's white, Dee Dee's dad was also white. So he feels like what the past tells us is that we're supposed to accept people. So he feels like knowing how hard things were for his mom growing up means that anything that might bother him about his dynamic with her, he just needs to accept it and like understand her. And he's staked his identity on being this good son. And he has this big weight of responsibility on him at home. And Dee Dee's kind of the opposite. She can't access the past. Like, she has all these questions about her mom's family back in the Philippines and their past, and her mom just doesn't want to talk about it. And Dee Dee's always fighting with her. Her mom has all these rules that like Dee Dee doesn't totally understand. And so where Dee Dee's coming from is like, I can't access the past. My mom was always saying not to think about it. She can't accept her mom, and she can't accept herself either. And she's in this place of being like, if my mom wants to make me out to be the bad daughter, then I'll be the bad daughter. But the nice thing about it being a romance is like these two people slowly fall in love over the course of the story and kind of challenge each other and change each other. And by the end, they're both in a different place on these big questions than they were in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I found, like, I like how you said that Jay and Dee Dee are foils of each other. And I think that's, like, so true. I found Jay to be, like, the definition of a duck gliding across the surface of, like, water. But he's, like, paddling furiously under the water. And it's, like, he makes it so effortless to be responsible, to, like, make friends. And that's, like, really hard for Dee Dee. So I was like, oh, okay, like, is like a really good dynamic that you created between them.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, the duck metaphor actually makes sense because Jay, a central plot in your book is Jay teaches Dee Dee how to drive in his car overnight. And Jay drives a car with a manual transmission, which is kind of like, in today's world, making it harder on yourself, right? It looks cool. It's making it harder on yourself.
Totally.
Can you tell us about the decision to have Dee Dee learn to drive in a car with manual transmission? Like, does this reflect on your own personal view on cars?
So, okay, for some reason, like, I can't even exactly put my finger on the reason why I wanted to write a story about, like, secret late night driving lessons. This is one of the earliest ideas I got on the story, like, in the depths of the pandemic. But it was just kind of like what my heart wanted. I think it contains a lot of my favorite things. Like, I love late night drives. I love those conversations when you're, like, facing forward towards the road, like maybe driving with a friend somewhere or something. And you can suddenly, like, it's easier to talk about things that might have been hard to talk about if you were, like, face to face in the daytime. I love liminal spaces, just like the aesthetic of, like, desolate locations, like an abandoned mall parking lot. I don't know. But so for that car, I think at one point I was like, if I'm going to make learning how to drive a central part of the plot, I should at least make it difficult. So that's why I made it manual transmission, just to make it, like, make there be a bit more to say. But also, okay, I did put a lot of thought into the specific car he drives. And it's funny because, like, I put so much thought into the car he drives. This isn't even, like, in the book. Like, this is, like, lore that's just in my head, like, that is not in the book.
Passage of, like, a rite of passage for writers, Wikipedia and, like, Googling very specific details. We had Maureen Gu on this show before, and she was like, I had to Google so many, like, boat things, even though it was just, like, for one scene, and
oh my God,
didn't put anything in it. So yeah, like, it is a common thing.
So Jay's deal is that he was a car guy, and that was something he shared with his dad, but now he hates his dad because his dad left his mom. He's an asshole. And so Jay's, like, changing his identity. He, like, changed his name. He's like, I don't like cars anymore, but he still has this car that he loved, that he, like, saved up all this money to buy when he was younger. And the specific kind of car, it's a 2004 Subaru Impreza WRX STI. And there's a joke in the book where, like, it says STI in the middle of the steering wheel, and Dee Dee gets in and she's like, STI. But so the thought process behind the specific car was I was watching a lot of Fast and Furious during, like, in 2020 during COVID lockdown. I like binged all those movies, and then I started reading about the real life car culture, like the JDM car culture, in, like, the early 90s, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. But at one point I was, like, reading an article on JSTOR about this car culture. Like, I went really deep. And it was this, like, mostly Asian American, California based subculture, which that's what, like, kind of fascinated me about it. So in my head, like, Jay is also growing up in a mostly white place. And in my mind, he would have, like, romanticized this car culture because it was this, like, all Asian American thing.
Yeah, it was really funny as someone who grew up in Southern California in the late 90s, going to college in the early 2000s, to see, like, this kid in, like, the East Coast suburbs have, like, the most riced out car you can get.
Yeah, like, I mean, I love how you mentioned, like, car culture in, like, the 90s in like, the Asian American community in California, because there was, like, a sense of nostalgia to your book, even though it's set in present day. Like you have your characters writing letters, and letters is like a motif in your book, which is surprising because, you know, characters can just text and call. They have immediate communication. And Dee Dee, she is like forced to write these letters to her grandfather that she's never met in her life. So like, why were you so drawn to attaching letter writing to your characters?
Yeah, there's like thematic reasons, and then there's just like selfish, like this is easy for me as a writer reasons. But the thematic reason, like one of the thematic reasons is a big question in this book is like what lasts from the past, what is useful to us from the past. And I love that letters are like a literal thing that can endure through time. And like you can find a letter that somebody wrote like decades ago and read it, and that happens in the book. And so like narratively, I also just find them very like convenient and also like rich for the narrative. Like I love that you can discover a letter when you're not the intended recipient. You can lose a letter. There's something romantic about it. It's more tangible. All those reasons, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely understand the tangible nature of letter writing, because like your character Dee Dee, like she deletes things off of her phone all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, it's for practical reasons because she doesn't want her mom to like, you know, see all her photos and see like messages with a boy. And it's like, yeah, she doesn't get to keep all of that. And it's funny timing that we're having this conversation because like Marvin and I were talking about how like, do kids know about like CD players? Do they know about DVD players? Like, do they know about like archiving? Like things are going to be lost one day, like just disappear from the internet.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of like physical media, I really like the way that like cassettes played a part in your novel. One of your characters, Susie, who was Dee Dee's best friend, who I really enjoyed as a character. She was a very like positive presence in a book with a lot of teen angst, right? And at the start of the book, she's the one that drives Dee Dee around everywhere. And it was really cool that, you know, her car had a cassette player, and that becomes important in the plot too. Especially because it just feels like no one has like cassette players anymore. Like, you know, my computer barely has a CD player these days.
Oh, so to this day, I drive a car with a cassette player. Because I drive like a 2005 Honda. So I guess when I was writing the book, I was like, well, if I still have this, other people might. But also, I remember when I was a teenager, I would get fascinated with things through my friends' parents. Like, I had a friend in high school, and a lot of her music taste came from her dad, and that's how I got into like the Talking Heads or like Slater Kinney. I don't know, like older music that was like technically kind of before my time. But so that's kind of what I was channeling there. But I also wanted to do that like because I didn't want to name anything too pop culture, because then that can like, you know, maybe the next year it won't be relevant anymore. So that's kind of like part of why I did that too.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like a lot of the music I listened to when I was a kid was my dad's music. So, you know, you get your musical taste from your parents.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't just inherit our parents' trauma. We inherit their music taste.
Yeah, totally.
While I was reading this book, I kept thinking like Marvin said, it, like you're in the headspace of a teenager who is stuck in an emotionally abusive relationship with her mother. And, you know, the whole time I was like, everybody needs therapy. Everybody needs to be able to talk to each other. But that's easier said and done, especially when you're part of the Asian American community and your parents are, you know, part of a generation where therapy was kind of not a thing. It was a taboo, or it was like a rich white people activity. Yeah. So they don't really think it's applicable to them. But at the same time, it's like, well, like you can't just bottle it up. It's going to manifest in one way or another. And one thing Dee Dee's mother often gripes about is how much easier her daughter's life is. She worked so hard to ensure a more comfortable life for her daughter, but at the same time, she like resents it. So can you share your thoughts on like that contradiction and how it plays into the cycle of abuse?
Yeah, I think I feel like in my own life, a big block to going to therapy and like addressing my pain was feeling like my pain wasn't big enough and feeling like I didn't deserve it in a way. But I think as I got older, I also kind of felt that there was like a similarity with people in the generations above me dealing with their stuff, even though it felt like bigger than my issues. I feel like everyone was like around me was kind of saying like it's self-indulgent, and the undertone of that is like it's not the biggest problem, so I shouldn't like I don't deserve to look into it, kind of, or like spend time on dealing with it. And I think that was an idea like knocking around in my head when I wrote this. So like both of the moms, like Jay's mom and Dee Dee's mom, they're very different, and I think they're like maybe dysfunctional ways of loving their kids come out differently. Like Jay's mom is very warm, very fun, and Dee Dee's like jealous of him when she first meets his mom. But then there's like, you know, other things about their relationship that are kind of like codependent and not great for him. Dee Dee's mom is like very harsh with her and kind of just like says that like the most vicious things she can, but she's like, oh, it's not physical, it's just words, so like whatever, she should be fine. But one thing I had in my head with both of those characters was like the moms are both telling themselves that they don't deserve to deal with their pain because it's like not that big a problem, just like walk it off kind of. But it's coming out sideways. It's like they didn't transform it, so they're transmitting it. And Dee Dee and Jay are both struggling with that idea of like there are so many more urgent problems around me, like the people in my life need things from me, or like even if I'm not doing anything for the people in my life, I don't deserve to spend brain space on this. Like I should be studying for the SATs or something. So they both kind of struggle with that notion. And I think at the end, they both come out the other side where they're like, oh, I should pay attention to this and like give it some attention.
Yeah, like one of the ways that Dee Dee's mother kind of, channels through her pain is telling her these ghost stories from the Philippines. And these are just like fragments of family history that Dee Dee receives because Dee Dee doesn't really know much about her past other than these stories. And a recurring character in these stories is the Ashwang. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what drew you to the idea of using it in your book and like Dee Dee's fascination with ghosts?
Yeah, I guess it's because I'm fascinated with ghosts and monsters, and I'm so fascinated with the stories of the like specific monsters from the Philippines that I would hear growing up sometimes. And I also like, so I wasn't told these stories as like frequently as Dee Dee is. I did a lot of research after the fact. So a swang is kind of like a broader category for like a bunch of monsters. But it's also when her mom says the aswang, she means a specific one. Its other name is the manananggal. And I'm so obsessed with this creature for some reason. But I think there's like a broader diaspora interest in this. Well, I'll explain what it is first. So it's a woman who she looks like a beautiful woman during the daytime, but at night she sprouts bat wings from her back, and her body like segments in two at the waist, and her top half lifts off. Her intestines are like flapping, and her top half goes flying into the night. Her legs are just like chilling somewhere, and her tongue becomes this like long mosquito like needle, and she punctures people and sucks out all their viscera. So I'm so fascinated with this figure for some reason. I think it's just like, I'm literally saying something that like an adult says in the book at one point. So sorry, I'm like revealing myself, but I just think she's so badass. Like, I
will say you do invoke this imagery multiple times in your story. And every time I was like, what am I reading? Did we change the genre?
Yeah, okay. I think that like also, sorry, I'm kind of changing tacks a little bit here, but
No, yeah, go right ahead.
I feel like throughout my life, I've kind of felt like I was gaslit to some extent about how Filipino I am. It's the kind of, because I'm mixed. My dad was white, and you get these like confusing messages. Like my mom is telling me I'm basically white, but then like I'll get confused for like another Filipino girl who isn't mixed, or like when I was like really young and I was living in like all white small towns, I'd like get called a slur, but then it's like, but you're not really Filipino. I don't know. So I during COVID lockdown, I was like, what things do make me feel really Filipino? And one of the answers that just like surfaced out of my subconscious was that I think about this monster all the time, that I'm preoccupied with the manananggal. But I think also like, I do feel like it's kind of like a Southeast Asian thing. Like I've talked to like friends who are Filipino and Vietnamese and Thai, and like we all are really into ghosts. Like we like
you guys have
tell
some
these
pretty
stories about
terrifying
ghosts.
ones.
Yeah, ghosts and monsters. But I'm so fascinated with these stories. Like I started reading these compilations of a professor in the Philippines did like interviews with people all around the country where they tell their version of the Manananggal story, and they're all different. They're all just so weird. They're so like fantastical and wild, and yeah, so I'm obsessed with those stories. But I think it's an interesting way for like things from the past to trickle down. So, okay, I think I mentioned that a lot of like diaspora Filipinos are also kind of reclaiming the aswang, the manananggal. And there's like an artist who's really amazing. Her name is Alex Cabal. Her Instagram is like Cabals with a Z. She does these incredible paintings of the manananggal. And I have one print of hers where it's like, she's like in the process of like segmenting, her intestines are hanging out, and it says across the top, reclaim your power, let go of fear. Like, I feel like, I don't know, I think it's a shared thing for some reason that a lot of like diaspora Filipinos find this image empowering. And there is a narrative that like, that this monster was like demonized by the colonizing like Spanish Catholics. Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah.
There's also this weird like historical anecdote that I worked into the book about how the CIA used the fear of the aswang in their fight against the communists in the Philippines. Like they would puncture people's necks and be like, oh, the aswang was here.
They colonized their monsters and used it against them. Yeah, like I do love this idea of reclaiming like our ancestral monsters and myths and taking it out of like a colonial lens.
Yeah. I mean, as a book club that reads exclusively Asian American books, it's interesting to see, especially from the Asian American authors, the different ways that we try to reclaim or claim or discover our cultures. And ghost stories, monster stories are a perfectly viable avenue for that. It's something I'm always thinking about now as I'm about to become a father. It's like, how do I pass on culture to my kids? And like stories are a very important part of that, like whether it's folklore or ghost stories.
Yeah. And they contain messages in a way. Like they're often like weird and kind of enigmatic, but there's messages about what to be afraid of. Like I think a lot of these monster stories were probably told to get kids to behave. Like don't go out at night. I don't know. The aswang will get you. I don't know. Probably. I feel like there was one
pleasantly surprised that both Dee Dee and Jay were mixed race, like they're Wasians, and I don't know, it's just like, even though we've read so many books by Asian American authors, many of them who are mixed race, like it's just very rare to see both the main leads be mixed race. And like I just wanted to ask you like what was that experience for you? Because obviously you were talking about like how you cling to like these ghost stories and you're like obsessed with them, and it's kind of a way to feel more Filipino. And at the same time, like you know, we see that with Dee Dee, but like your book doesn't lean too heavily on like these two characters who are mixed race, like navigating their cultural identities. Like it is like a romance novel. So like just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was really important to me to get to center that experience. And I kind of started writing this as like a piece of art therapy, right? Like I actually like wasn't really thinking about getting this published when I first started it. And I remember texting a friend saying that I'm writing about an experience like mine, like it's normal. And it feels so good. Like I wrote it not really wanting to explain anything, I guess. But just to like write out of my experience in a genuine way. And I wanted the love interest and the main character to both be mixed Asian so that I could give both of them like some of my real feelings, and then they like bounce off each other and change throughout the course of the story, like I mentioned. But I also I feel like I wanted to be kind of like light touch about how much they talk about their identity. Like I think it is a real layer to how fascinated they are with each other. Like I found myself like growing up in mostly white places, I would really gravitate to like other mixed kids. Because I feel like there was just this like unspoken sense of like, we're both dealing with the same things that don't exactly make sense to us, but maybe we also can't really articulate them, but we just like gravitate toward each other. So that just felt real to me. And I think that's like how they relate to each other too. But yeah, like I also feel like some things about being mixed have maybe been like overdone. It's a weird thing because I feel like that experience has been so underdone in fiction overall. But when it is done, it's kind of the same conversations happen where it's like, you can be this and you can be this. So I kind of like when the one time they do talk about being biracial in the book with each other, they're doing it by making jokes. Like she's like annoyed that this boy at a party said that she looks exotic, and she's like, oh, I'm an exotic animal, you'll have a hard time getting me through customs. But I felt like that was like a way of just being like, yeah, it's kind of dehumanizing to I don't know, it's not like
it's the microaggression. Yeah, it's very specific.
But also I felt like at the time I started writing this, I felt like I had mostly read biracial Asian characters who are written as like a metaphor for something, like a metaphor for indecision or being between worlds, or who were written as a way to make the characters somehow like more palatable to white audiences, which I really have like complicated feelings about, because my experience throughout my life has been that in many cases I have clearly not been that palatable to white people, like, you know, being called a slur or being like confused for someone else. So I wanted to write a story where it's like, this isn't a metaphor for anything. It's just kind of something they're going through, which has been true to my life.
Yeah, I think you did it beautifully. And I do love how there is like this secret bond over that like common trait of like, oh, we're both, you know, white mixed race, because like they both share secret answers. Like when Dee Dee asks Jay, like, oh, what's your favorite food? And he's like, eggs and fish sauce. You got the true answer. I would not give that answer out to white people. And it's like, wow, like a real one that like, I'm not mixed race, but I've definitely felt that where I have to like filter myself to be more palatable. And I'm pretty sure like that is like 10 times worse for someone who is mixed race. So I think you wrote that experience pretty beautifully. We are winding down to the end of our interview, and I kind of want to end with a light note because we did touch on like very heavy topics. So like there's a lot of driving in this book, clearly. So like if you could give a soundtrack to this book, like what would it be?
Oh yeah. I love music. I made so many playlists. Like I actually made a playlist for every single scene of this book while I was working on it. But
Amazing.
That I did distill like a short playlist that I have it in my Linktree linked if anybody wants to see it. But some of the songs that I put on this playlist. So I mention old songs in the book, but I didn't put those songs on the playlist. I tried to pick songs I think Dee and Jay would actually listen to when they're like driving around at night. One song that really like I associate with this book now though is Apple by Charlie XCX. Like that song came out after I finished working on the book, but it's about generational trauma and driving all night. So I was like, this is too perfect. So that is on the playlist. Black Hole by Boy Genius really sounds the way that their like night drives sound to me in my mind. Blue by Keshi is like a very J-coded song to me. Yeah, those are some of the songs on the playlist, but it's in my Linktree if anybody wants it.
We'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So congratulations on your debut. You know, we got to ask, are you working on anything else right now? Or is anything else coming down the pipe for me? Or
Yeah, actually, it is. So I'm currently finishing revisions on my second YA with Disney. So I will have a second YA romance coming out with them in spring 2026. And I kind of don't want to say too much about it until the cover reveal, I guess. But it's about a ghost hunting road trip.
I was going to say, it's going to be about ghosts and monsters because I really want to read that from you.
No, it's funny. Like a Filipino-American friend who I was talking to about the story, she was like, oh yeah, it's our culture, like ghost hunting. But yeah. And I it's funny, like second book syndrome is so real. And I went through like a lot with this book, but I'm at this point now where I really love the story and the characters. So I'm very excited to get to share more about that, hopefully sometime early next year. And then I actually have 2 secret, like unannounced things coming. I'm going to be entering my adult rom-com era in awesome. 2026. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on all your success. And, you know,
thank you.
Congrats on writing such a great book. We really had a great time reading it and looking forward to all the other projects you have coming down. But yeah,
thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. And that was Clare Osongco. You can find her debut novel, Midnights with You, available now at booksellers everywhere, including, as always, the Books and Boba bookshop. So if you'd like to have your book purchasing power go towards supporting us at Books and Boba, as well as your local bookstores, head on over to booksandboba.com and click on the bookshop link. We really appreciate your support. I guess before we go, Rira, can you remind us what we are reading for book club this month for December 2024?
Yeah, so December is my pick, and we are reading Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju and translated by Jamie Chang. This book is less than 200 pages, and I picked this book specifically for its length because it is the holiday season, but also as a contrast to our previous book club pick, Interior Chinatown, which is very much into the interior mind of an Asian American man. And now we are going into the mind of a Korean woman living in modern day Seoul under misogynistic standards and hierarchy.
Or you were just Nostradamus and anticipated the major news out of South Korea.
Yeah, really weird timing with that, but I'm constantly seeing stuff about like South Korea's 4B movement and like the decline of birth rates. It's something that is always like seeping into my feed, so I really felt like I wanted to read this book for book club. And it is a book that came out like back in 2016, so I'm really glad that it finally got translated in 2020. And even though it's taking us 4 years to finally pick it up, I'm really excited to dive into it and talk about it with you guys on Discord.
So yeah, for those of you who are Patreon supporters and reading along with us, please let us know your thoughts on Discord, where we're having a lively chat in real time. And for those of you not on Patreon, you can always tell us your thoughts about the book on our Goodreads forums. As always, we'd love to include your feedback on our book club discussion episodes whenever possible. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you again to Clare Osongco for joining us. We'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.